Welcome to Living, Learning, and Leading with Purpose with me, Dr. Wajida Small. This channel is for those who want to live fulfilled lives, grow personally and professionally, and develop into influential and impactful leaders in their organizations, industries, and communities. Through my blog, podcast, and books, I share the best stories, lessons learned, and advice to help you live, learn, and lead with purpose. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Leading with Purpose podcast. With me, Dr. Wajida Small. I am so excited about this week's episode. We have an amazing guest, y'all. I love this woman. She is everything. Her name is Dr. Lisa Brooks-Greaux. I met Dr. Lisa through work that I've done with my organization, in particular, the ERG, our Black Professionals Network. And she came and she spoke to us. Y'all, this lady is absolutely amazing. And so I want you all to get to know her just a little bit better. I am going to pull up my notes and read her bio so that I do not miss a thing. So here we go. Dr. Lisa Brooks-Greaux is principal and founder of Sync, Seek Your Natural Calling. With over 25 years of strategy, business development, sales, leadership, and executive development experience spanning financial services, life sciences, and technology-based industries. Lisa brings a unique and innovative perspective on the relationship between personal and professional development. As a talent and diversity, equity, and inclusion strategist, thought leader, and executive coach, Lisa is committed to helping leaders achieve their potential while leveraging their unique strengths. She has an enviable track record of success by deploying targeted assessments and incorporating both performance and behavior coaching. Lisa has held several leadership roles at Pfizer, Zoetis, Delphi, JP Morgan Chase, and Verizon, where she was responsible for designing and executing strategies to develop senior and enterprise level leaders and their teams. From 2005 to 2015, Lisa was on the faculty at Fordham University graduate HR program and is currently a faculty member at Montclair State University in the Graduate School of Business. Dr. Brooks-Greaux's professional education includes a Bachelor's of Science in Financial Management from Temple University, a Master of Science in Organizational Development from Fordham University, and a doctorate in Organizational Leadership from Columbia University. Among Lisa's most distinguished honors was being selected as one of the 25 most influential women in business by the Network Journal. In 2008, she was a featured speaker at the Global HR Forum in Seoul, Korea. And in 2018, she was the recipient of the Professional Excellence Award from Montclair University. Most recently, Lisa launched her first book, Don't Abdicate the Throne. Dr. Brooks-Greaux's areas of expertise and scholarly interests are in diversity, equity, inclusion, leadership and senior leader development, women as leaders, and leadership transitions. Lisa also serves on the board of directors for Montefiore Nyack Hospital, the Center for Safety and Change, and Young Life Northeast Board. Did I not tell y'all she was amazing? I'm so excited to talk to her because, again, Dr. Lisa is everything. So let's get started. So as I said to you all, we have an absolutely wonderful guest, Dr. Lisa, but I'm going to call her Lisa because she told me to call her Lisa. So thank you again so much, Lisa, for joining us today. I'm really excited because as I mentioned in the bio, you and I have met before through work, and I explained I talked a lot, I read your bio, but what I find is that bios don't necessarily do the person justice. So what I generally like to ask my guests to do when they come on is, as an introduction to the audience, if they can share their story. So I'd like for you to share your story with us.
So, wow, you know, it's so funny because I'm always asking people to share their story. So now that the table is turned on me to share my story, so I was like, okay, wow. And I will share this because I grew up in a really small town in Pennsylvania. And I think that, you know, coming from a small place and not being exposed to a lot of different things really played into me being intimidated by a lot of things because I didn't know, because I wasn't exposed. And so with that, but then I also had a lot of curiosity. And I think it was my curiosity about the world around me that really propelled me forward. So I was always curious, I was always questioning, and then which obviously led me to college, you know, going to a city, which was culture shock for me. And then finding out that I really loved the excitement, you know, of a larger city. But again, that curiosity theme kind of is part of my entire life, is the story that threads through my entire life. So I was curious about things. I was curious about, I think first and foremost, about leaders, watching different leaders and seeing what made them tick and how they were either good leaders or bad leaders. And I had the great fortune to work for a number of leaders that were really good. And there was a constant theme that I'll talk about a little later that pulls through them. But what I wasn't seeing women leaders, at least I wasn't seeing their stories portrayed in journals or in the bookstores. And particularly, I wasn't seeing women of color, and in particular, Black women leaders. I wasn't seeing their story told in bookstores. And I was frustrated because I had the great fortune of being mentored, of being tutored, of being carried through by great Black women leaders. So I got frustrated that their story wasn't being told. And of course, that led me to, you know, finding out why. And I was told, well, you know what, there isn't any body of work around that. So which led me to say, okay, I'm going to contribute to that body of work around women leaders, which hence led me to going back to school, to, you know, to getting advanced degrees. But that's kind of my story. And it was that theme of curiosity and then getting mad because I wasn't seeing our story being told. So again, so coming from a small town, going to the big city, kind of culture shock, but then realizing that I really liked it. And then all the things I grew up from having a small town background really worked in my favor. So that's my story in a nutshell.
I think it's very interesting that I want to touch on 2 points. The first point I want to touch on is the fact that there had not been any Black women leaders. For me, I had never seen anything, and I happened to come across this wonderful group of women. It was just kind of like, wow, like where did they come from? Because I've never seen them. And you talked about kind of like that curiosity, which I also want to go back to, but kind of like the question of where are they? And the fact that they weren't in any journals or anything like that. And my doctoral studies and my dissertation was on the self-limiting factors that prevent the emergence of women of color leaders. And as I was just trying to do my own research, it was kind of like, wait a second, like I know they exist.
Right.
I know they exist. So why isn't there much more information out there about women of color, in particular Black women and leaders? Because while I have not necessarily had the opportunity to have worked under many of them, I want to say maybe one or two in my entire career, which has been relatively long. I would think that there would be more. But I like that you said that you were curious, and the curiosity is kind of what drove you in the direction that it drove you. And I want you to touch on that just a little, because when I think about just my own upbringing as a Black woman, we're told we're not supposed to be curious. We're not supposed to ask questions. We're supposed to just kind of like stay over there, be quiet, because we don't want to be noticed because of all of the negative things that comes with being noticed as an intelligent Black woman. So can you just talk about what fuels your curiosity, and if so, you know, how you were able to kind of break away from how we are generally brought up to be, to just kind of keep your mouth shut?
So there's a lot to unpack in that question too, because we are socialized to, kind of, to be seen and not heard, and sometimes not to even be seen. And it's because it's a protection element to keep us safe. So it was never done out of being malicious or malice. It was done because our parents, our guardians, or whomever raised us wanted to keep us safe. And that was the best way at the time to stay safe, is to not be seen and to not be heard. So there was that element of it, right? And I get that. However, I think the narrative has to change, and it has slowly changed. But we've been socialized to keep it tamped down. Don't raise your hand. And slowly I began to see, okay, you know what? And part of my curiosity too was, well, how does that work that way? Why does that work? And just kind of moving forward. And I will tell you, sometimes the curiosity backfired on me. I've gotten burned, but that curiosity also led me to live and work outside the US as an expat. And so again, it was that curiosity, like, wow, so the world just isn't the US. The world just isn't my small piece of the pie where I grew up and I was raised in. There's 7 continents. And I was so curious about that, like, wow, how do other people live? How do other people work? What are their families like? So that curiosity led me to go outside the US and work and live. And I will tell you, that was the most eye-opening experience I have ever had in my life. Because you get to see, like, wow, what we've read and what we see on TV, or any of our ways that we get information at the time. It's like, well, there's so much more out here. And yeah, maybe it's not necessarily true the way it's been portrayed. So that, again, but that was all part of my curiosity that led me, to go to Greece, and then go to Indonesia, and then go to the Czech Republic. It's like, I was really curious about how the world worked, how other people live. And, when I come back and you realize that, number one, because people always ask me, well, what did you learn? And they're expecting some big,
and I want to know too.
Okay, it's not that deep and it's not that big. It's just, number one, is that there are many ways of doing something right. We tend to think in the US that we have a lock on our way is the right way, it's the only way. Well, yeah, I would tell you that people in Indonesia also think the way that they do things is really right too. And it is, because it works. So, there are many ways of doing something right. I also learned a huge amount of compassion. It just, like, my heart just opened up when I lived abroad, because you become very compassionate because people live differently. People have different struggles, and tolerance. So, and then tolerance was the other big thing. I learned to be, a lot more accepting, a lot more tolerant. And so those were my big 3 takeaways. People were always saying, that's it. And I'm like, yeah, that's really it. Because those were really big eye-opening things for me. And that we're the same world over. I mean, we essentially want the same thing. We want our families, to be healthy and well. We want to educate, kids. So, those are the things that are the same. We start making all these big differences, and not really.
That's very interesting, because I would expect, and I think most people would expect, that you, as a Black woman expat, that there would be something so much grander than what you just explained. However, when you think about it, compassion, tolerance, acceptance, those are major things for anyone to be able to really learn, and what's the word I'm looking for? Just, I guess, absorb and live in a way where that's a part of I'll say their core values, if
Mhm.
that will. Those kinds of things are generally dismissed as, in some ways, given, when that's not the case. That's not the case at all. So I'm glad you said that, because I also just learned something, because it's kind of like, I always think about us, us as in women of color, as Black women living abroad, living outside of the United States. And, just, I guess I'll use the term curiosity about kind of what that is like. And I've heard some stories, all different stories, but I'm always amazed at just how simply human they are, if that makes sense. Yeah. So thank you. Thank you for that.
Oh, no, and I'm always happy to talk to people about that, especially because, in addition to my work as a consultant and coach, I'm also a professor. And that's one of the things I always tell my students early on. Either, do a semester abroad, or when you're working, start looking at opportunities to go work and live abroad, because it will change your life. And for me, it was that one thing that catapulted my career unlike anything else. And again, it's about being curious. My
Mhm.
The other thing I'll also say too is that my parents were like so super supportive. They're like, yes, go, we'll come visit. And my mom did. My mom came and she stayed with me for a while. And so I think that, having that family support and them saying, hey, go, we'll be there for you. We'll come visit. So
Mhm.
that was also helpful for me too.
Thank you. And support is very important, because I'll say my mom was afraid for me to go anywhere that wasn't to school and back home. And I remember, I don't even know what came over me at one point during my kind of like, let's choose a college thing.
Mhm.
I found a school in Russia, and I was like, I want to go to
Wow.
college in Russia. And my mom was like,
Wow.
yeah, no, nope, you are not going
Mhm.
to Russia. She was kind of anxious about me going to Connecticut and being there kind of by myself. So that support is important, but that, I think that also goes back to that need to um, kind of protect us.
Mhm. Absolutely.
Um, and so, in along the same lines, I want to go back to, you mentioned that you would come back. So I want to go back, that when you thought about all of the leaders that you came across, all of the phenomenal leaders, both men and women, Black women, women of color, that there was a common thread. What was that thread?
Yeah. So the common thread that was empathy. And I didn't realize it at the time until I started going back and doing my own research and looking back, and it was empathy. And it wasn't something that was talked about 20 years ago, right? It wasn't like empathy wasn't one of those, when you look at core competencies of a leader, empathy back then wasn't talked about. It was almost discarded. If you were an empathetic leader, you were seen as weak. But that's the thread that when I start pulling through the Black women, women of color, through men, men of color, that's that common thread that I pulled through, and I'm like, that's what made them human. That's what made them real. That's also what made the people who followed them galvanize behind them and push through the wall, right? So when people could have said, yeah, okay, you know what, I've done my work, I'm done, that it was that empathy that they portrayed, that they had, that got them, had them be able to galvanize people to go that extra mile for them. And so now we hear empathy. Now it's in vogue, right? But to be an empathetic leader, I think there's even a book called that. But 20 years ago, it wasn't. It was just something that these folks had. And I think more than anything, it was their North Star. It was part of their moral compass. And that's how they led.
So I want to ask you a question, a more personal question. I'll tell you why after you give me the
Okay.
answer.
Now I'm scared.
So in thinking about kind of empathy, right? And at least for me, I thought it was, I'll say, natural, if you will. And so I I took the Gallup strengths,
Okay.
right? And empathy wasn't exactly high on my list of strengths. At the same time, I've always considered myself as someone that was empathetic, especially in my leadership. So before I tell you where it actually fell on my list, how has that actually, how have you seen that show up in the leaders that you were just talking about?
So how I've seen it show up is they reveal, they would reveal more of their personal lives, more of their own personal stories, the struggles that they've had. So they were able to relate to, people perhaps who were taking care of, elderly parents. They were able to relate to, okay, I got to get my, kids to school. They were able to relate to just, life in general, not just work, but they were able to relate to, our personal things that we come with. Because when we think about it, I don't know that there's that much separation of work and life. I think it's all just life when we happen to work and we happen to have a personal life as well. And so they mix. I mean, they intermingle so much now. 25 years ago, you could like separate them. I was telling somebody the other day, I said, I do remember the day that I went on vacation and I started taking my laptop. Right. And so now we're going back 20 some odd years. And she looked at me, she goes, there was a time when you never took your laptop? I'm like, yeah, there was that time way back when. But that's just the intermingling of our lives so much, and technology, of course, too. But those leaders, those empathetic leaders, were able to come and say, okay, you know what? I get it. Life happens. Let's figure out how we can do this together. So it wasn't just, okay, hey, you got this thing going on, figure it out yourself. They were like, let's figure this out together. So that was that thread that comes through. So for me, that's how I saw it, with the leaders. They allowed their guard to be put down, and they weren't concerned so much about what people were going to think. And I think that also has to do with confidence. I think it also has to do with, a number of other things as well. So it allowed them to bring their full and true selves to work. Yeah, and that's another conversation, because as Black women, I don't know that we always are. I don't know that we're always allowed to show up as our full selves. And now there's more of a push for us to be able to do that. But sometimes I think, yeah, you say that, but then there's the back end. So that's a conversation too. Yeah. Like, yes, bring your full self to work, be vulnerable, but I don't necessarily know that that's really true, because I always say that, sometimes like allowing yourself to be fully vulnerable depends on the organization.
It does. And that's very interesting, because when I actually took my I guess now in thinking of all of those factors, I could see where they each play a role, because it's kind of like, I always thought myself to be a very empathetic person. And it's kind of like, wait a minute, empathy is number 34 for me. And I was just like, that's very interesting. How is it? And for, just kind of like jokingly, one of my, a supervisor of mine, laughed, because it was kind of like, I have been known to be the person that says, in this moment, emotions don't matter. Like, this is a strictly kind of like task decision, business decision. And yes, people are going to feel the way that they feel, but you can't allow your emotions to cloud a judgment that needs to be made for like the safety of people and things like that. And so in being that person, but I'm also the head of HR, and I have to look at it in terms of risk and, just kind of what's the cost, what's the benefit, how are people going to be impacted? But that also goes to what you said in terms of being able to show up as your full self and being vulnerable. I'm a very emotional individual. There's in no situation I have ever been in when I think about my career in HR, and just what I've always found to be the worst is, regardless of the situation, telling someone that they no longer have a job. It literally takes all of me to just be like, okay, take a deep breath, because you understand the impact that that decision is going to have on regardless of the situation. Someone now can't take care of their family. They're going to be losing their health benefits. Unless you're not a human being, there's no way that something like that is not going to impact you emotionally. There's no way you're not going to at least try to understand. There's no way that you can't think of, if I was in this position, how would I actually feel? So yeah, a conversation for another day, especially kind of showing up fully, and just that idea of being vulnerable. Because that's just the exposure on a whole nother level. And it's just kind of like, I don't know, like, we're not ready for it. So I don't think y'all are ready for it either.
I mean, again, it's all those scripts and all those messages that we have going on in the back of our head growing up to keep us safe, to be successful in the workplace. So now you're telling me to unwind all those? And I don't know that I really trust you to allow myself to be vulnerable. So I think trust is a huge factor too. So who's telling me to be vulnerable? And if I don't trust you, yeah, no, that's not going to happen. So the vulnerability, you have to lay the foundation of trust first. And I think it's baby steps for us as Black women and people of color in general, just because we've seen the differences, what happens when we show up and vulnerable and the way somebody else shows up, right? So, and the different messages that are sent. So, we can show up, if we show up vulnerable, well, you know what, she's too emotional. I don't think she can handle that promotion because, she'll fall apart. Whereas somebody else will show up, and they're vulnerable. Look at that. They allow their feelings to be shown. And it's like, what? Like, wait, what?
Yeah.
So.
Well. It's the difference between, I think, one time I was, I'll say, in a disagreement with an individual. And I was told that, like, just in the context of literally like a couple of sentences, I was told I was being emotional, and that individual referred to themselves as passionate. And it was just kind of like, I'd like for you to explain to me the difference, because we both are passionate about our points of view and what we're discussing, especially what we're disagreeing on right now. So having had that experience, I know exactly what you're talking about. So one thing that I did want for you to share. So backstory, Lisa came to my place of employment, and she gave 2 talks for our Black Professionals ERG. They were absolutely amazing. And I'm just going to tell you, everybody is just like, when is Dr. Lisa coming back? I'm just letting you know that now. But she gave a presentation on a workshop on power. And when it was first presented, it was just kind of like, I think the concept and idea of power is an interesting one, especially for us as Black women, because at least when I think about some of my experiences and some of just my observations, a couple of things I see. Either we are told we don't have it, we don't think that we have it, or there's this conscious effort to strip it from us. And I think I've experienced all 3 of those things. And there are definitely more, but I see those 3 things as the most, I'll say, prominent. So if you could kind of, one, just like briefly, because I also don't think a lot of us understand what power actually is and that we actually have. So could you just kind of like explain that to us, but then in the context of, in particular for us, how we can remind ourselves that we have it, be confident in the power that we have, and not allow folks to, I'll say try, because I think it's more of a try to strip it versus an actual success in stripping it away from us.
Okay, so I know, but because again, this is one of my most favorite topics, because I dug myself out of believing that I didn't have power. So I know, and then once I realized what it is, I'm like, okay, I got to share this with the world. And unfortunately, when we hear the word power, oftentimes we think of power as being negative, like, ooh, or we think of it as the abuse of power, right? So there's that connotation that's kind of in our head already. And so I want to dispel that myth. Okay, you know what? We're not talking about the abuse of power because we've seen that. What we are talking about is manifesting and leveraging the power that resides in all of us. So I'll start with a quasi definition of power. And it's really the ability to influence and get things done. So that's essentially power in itself. And I've taken a couple of different definitions that I've seen throughout the years, and I've melded them together and said, okay, this makes sense for me. So, the ability to influence, and, influence is something that's huge too. Maybe that's a conversation for another day as well. But influence and get things done. And unfortunately, a lot of us think that we don't have power, right? And I think it was Alice Walker who said that if you believe you don't have power, then you don't have it. Mm-hmm. So it's all about how we start in our mind. It's our mindset. And Dr. Richard, you know that I'm a voracious reader. So one of the things, and of course, I have books right beside my side. So one of the books that I will tell everyone is this book called Mindset. And this book will talk about how to change your mindset. It's by Carol Dweck. And one of the things that I constantly read this book, probably about once every 2 years, because it reminds me to, if I get stuck thinking a way of thinking about something, how to change that mindset. But again, it's our mindset about power and how we all have it. We tend to think of power as just money, or a position, or both of those things. So if you don't have a lot of money and you don't have a position, sometimes we render ourselves powerless. And that couldn't be further from the truth, because there are actually 7 additional dimensions of power. So yeah, so money might be a byproduct of it. And position is definitely a form of power. But let's also think about this. Let's also think about, information. Let's think about connection. Let's think about expertise. And those are just 3 additional ones. And I'm going to go into a little bit about each of those. So if you think about the ability to access information, so you don't even have to have all the information residing in your head, because sometimes people will say, well, I don't know a lot, but I bet you have access to information, or I bet you're connected to people who have a lot of information or have access to information. So with a few keystrokes, can you access information, or can you access someone who has access to information? And, to bring that point home even a little further, think about all of the companies that provide access to information, because quite frankly, they've recognized that information is power and have made billions of dollars. Mm-hmm. I just think about Google. I think about all the other search engines. Yeah. Access to power. They figured it out. They're like, oh, yes, I can make a fortune off of this. And they have. Connection. Again, who are we connected to? So it's like, who do we know? And as my husband loves to say, yeah, but who knows you too? So it's like, right? So it's like, I'm like, ooh, okay, good. Mm-hmm. You're good with this. Mm-hmm. But so that's so true. And again, think of all the companies who were like, if I connect people together, this can be profitable for me. So we think about Facebook, we think about LinkedIn, mm-hmm. we think about all the social media sites. think about all the dating sites. That's what they do. They connect people and they make money doing it. So connection power is so, so key. And then the last thing I'm going to talk about is expertise. And all of us have an area of expertise, right? And essentially, it's something that we do better than our sphere of influence. So if we think about our circle of friends or family, what's that one thing that people come to you for advice, right? They come to ask you for. It may be, your technology advice. It may be your financial advice. It may be advice on career, how should I direct my career, or what should I do? So just stop and think about all those things that people come to you for. And people always say, well, I'm not really an expert in things. I'm like, really? I said, ask your friends, like, what are those things your friends ask you for? What are those things that your family asks you for? So we're all experts in something. And those are just 3, additional dimensions of power that I just mentioned. And we all can raise our hands and say, yeah, you know what? I do really like connecting people together. That's something I get a joy out of. Or I love information. I'm an information whiz. I can, a couple keystrokes, I can find anything. Or if a couple of keystrokes, I can find my friends who can find anything.
Yeah.
So it's being able to do that and think about power in a different way, because we all possess it. And so sometimes people think, well, I don't have like that really large personality, so therefore I might not be powerful. Well, power looks different on different people. So you may have more of an introverted personality. It doesn't make you any less powerful.
Yeah.
Right. Some of the most powerful people are those who operate underneath the wire. Right. So yeah, so power, and so I always say to folks, like, let's think about power a little bit differently, because we all have power. Now it's a matter of leveraging it. It's like, oh yeah, you know what? I do have power. Let me start to leverage it a little bit differently.
Yeah, that is amazing. And as you're talking, I'm thinking about my experiences, and you talked about like connection power, expertise power, and kind of what people come to you for. For a very long time, and I want to say in particular to my last two positions, I was in a position of power, but really I hadn't realized the actual power that I had. And so I'm listening to you, and I remember at a previous employer, there are challenges. I was the highest ranking Black woman in my organization. And I guess you would call me, I guess technically where I said it was middle management, but it was a smaller organization. So it was high enough, if you will. So there was the experiences of, people trying to strip my power, kind of like circumventing me, going around, not trying to prevent me from making the decisions that only I could make in certain situations. And so for a long time, I felt powerless. But as you're talking, I realized that even those people who, in certain circumstances, tried to strip me by going around me, they still came to me. I was the first person that they came to because they knew I would be the one that would be able to provide the resolution that they needed, whether it was, who do I need to talk to about this? How do I deal with this situation? Or I'm struggling in kind of like this area. What kind of advice can you give? And then when I think about like just my current employer, for a while, when I first started, I've been there for a while now. Again, kind of the same position. I was the highest ranking Black woman in the organization. And my role in HR just inherently comes with power in terms of it being a position of, and maybe not even power, I'll say authority, if you will. But as you were talking, I was noticing the same thing. And now that I've actually kind of moved up, I see some of the other kind of aspects of power manifesting itself and in a lot of different ways. And it's just kind of like, I think it's more of me not recognizing the power that I had, more so than, I don't know if I want to say I didn't believe I had it. Mm-hmm. It was difficult for me to see it. And it was literally, as you're explaining it, it was just kind of like, okay, that makes so much sense. But as I also think about in what you were explaining, in a lot of situations, because I didn't recognize that I had it, I allowed for it to be taken away. And as opposed to, I'll say, living into it, if that makes sense. It manifested itself as a means of frustration. I'm gonna pause 1 second. Oops. Okay.
So can you hear me? Okay, so wow, and what you just said is so common. So, as I hear you talking, I'm like, yeah, you know what? It's not surprising because, again, if we think back on all the messages and the scripts, the early scripts that we've heard, and how we've watched other folks survive, in organizations. Again, it's a lot of this is survival instinct, and we want people to feel comfortable with us. So all this stuff is going on in our head. We want other people to feel comfortable with us. So sometimes we will tamp down our power because, and I always say, and I think about this, is that how hard and how long did it take you to get there, to realize that position? So, we are not doing ourselves any service by playing small. So oftentimes it's almost like that permission to rise up into the role that you're in. So you have permission to operate as that powerful leader because no one gave this to you. You earned every bit of it. And as a Black woman, you earned it twice, right? Because, as I always say, the path of least resistance is rarely open for us. We generally cannot just walk through the front door and boom, we're there. Mm-hmm. It's, we have to jump over, or we kind of have to go around, or we have to go under to get there. So there's that dual effort. So you have earned the right to come full bore with your power. And again, when people recognize that, they will take their positions and they will start to respect your authority. But it's oftentimes how we come to the table. And if we're kind of coming in, slinking in, again, people see and they react to that. But all I'm saying to you and to all Black women out there, we have earned the right to be at the table, to have that seat at the table. No one has given that to us. Mm-hmm. We have earned the right to be there. And so rise up, come with your full self. Come with your full self to that table. And obviously you have earned the right to be there and be at that table and contribute, because not for nothing too, all the organizations need to hear from us. They need to hear our perspective. They need to hear our experiences. They need to hear our point of view.
Perfect. That is the perfect way to end our session. But before we go, I would like for you to tell our listeners where they can find you, where they can connect with you, what you're up to, how they can get involved.
So anyway, I can't tell you how much I've enjoyed today. This has been fantastic. I'm like, our time's up already. We can't keep talking.
I know, right?
So, this is so cathartic for me on a Saturday morning. It's like a cup of coffee and I get to talk to Dr. Wajida. So this has been, great for me. And you can find me on LinkedIn. You can also, my website is sync, SYNC worldwide.com. And I'm also on Instagram. So would love to hear from anyone, but I love the work that you're doing, Wajida, and it's phenomenal. Please keep doing this. Please keep inspiring all of us.
Thank you.
Thank you for being that amazing leader that you are.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lisa, and thank you everyone for listening. And I will catch you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for spending some time with me today. It has been great sharing this space with you. I hope that you have taken what you've needed so you can share what you've learned and that you are on your way to living, learning, and leading with purpose. I encourage you to stay connected with me. Please remember to subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. You can also follow us on Instagram at Leading with Purpose Podcast. And don't forget to visit my website, www.wajidasmall.com, where you can subscribe to my mailing list. Till next time.